So let's start by adding validation to our patch route in the places routes file. There, I'll add the second middleware, which is actually an array of middlewares. And again, we can check the incoming data here. Now, when we update a place, there are two pieces of information which we're extracting, title and description. So I want to validate these two pieces. I want to check the title field here, and check that it's not empty. So the same criteria I had up there. Well, and for the description, I also want to have the same. So I will check that we have a min length of 5 characters. And now with that, let's go to the places controller. And actually, we can now copy that logic which we got in create place. We can simply copy that over to update place, so that we first check if we do have validation errors. And if we do, I send back my error response. If we don't, I continue with my normal updating logic here. So with that, let's give it a try. Let's try running this patch request with an empty string for a title, and this fails. Now let's enter something valid here, but have a description which is too short, and it fails. And you also see that it does not just fail, it really also doesn't apply any of the updates, of course. Now if I do enter a valid description, however, this succeeds, and therefore if I get that single place, we see that updated data here as well. Now that's the validation for the other places route. Now for the user routes, I also want to validate. So first of all, let's import the check method here in the places routes file. And now the question is, where do we need validation? The obvious answer is these two routes, right? These two post routes. But actually, I would argue that we only need to validate on the sign-up route. Why? Because when the user logs in, we're searching for a user with that email, and thereafter, we're comparing passwords. So if invalid data was entered there, the login will fail anyways. So there isn't really a need to validate it before we run our logic. Hence, I will only add validation here on the sign-up route. And there I want to check the name of the user and make sure that it's not empty. I'll not require a minimum length because, well, we have very short names in the world as well, right? Just as we have very long ones. So I certainly don't want to check for any minimum or maximum length. Just not being empty would be a great thing. I also want to check the email, and there I will validate something else. I don't care whether it's empty or not. I want to make sure it's a valid email address. And for that, we have the normalize email method, which, for example, makes sure that test@test.com is converted to test@test.com. And thereafter, after normalize email, I also want to call isEmail. And this now validates that this really is a valid email address after being normalized. And last but not least, the password the user chose also has to be checked. Here I want to check that it has a min length of 6 characters for security reasons. Now, just as before, this is one half of the validation logic. We also need to copy this here, where we check for validation errors, into our sign-up middleware. And that means we need to import the validation result function. So here I will use object destructuring to get validation result out of the object I import from Express Validator. And then down there, we send back our error response if we couldn't validate the input data. Now with that, back to Postman, and let's try to sign up with an empty name. Invalid inputs passed. Let's try to sign up with a valid name, but an invalid email address. I deleted the @ symbol. Does not work. Let's try to sign up with a password, which is too short. Does not work. And let's enter validator everywhere, and this works. And now for a login, if I, for example, leave the email field empty, we simply couldn't identify a user, and that's totally fine. We need no extra validation there. So this all is looking good. We added validation. I noticed there is one place where we can add some extra logical step, and that is for a delete place. I want to check if we have a place before we try to delete it. So I'll check if dummy places find finds a place where the ID is equal to the place ID we're trying to get rid of. And if that is not the case, if this is falsy, then I actually want to throw a new HTTP error where I want to say could not find a place for that ID, and hence not return this deleted place message. That's just a little bonus which I want to add to ensure that when we do delete a place, it works if we do have the ID, but we get back could not find a place if we don't have the ID or don't have a place with that ID, instead of always returning deleted place. With that, validation was added, and now the only missing piece, which I still want to implement here, is that when we create a place, I don't want to assume that we get the coordinates from the client, but instead my assumption here is that we get the address, and we then translate that to coordinates by actually working together with another REST API, which we won't write on our own, but which instead already exists. A REST API created by Google, which helps us, well, convert addresses to coordinates.